And that's part of it too, is we have to respect the risk side of the stock market and its impact on the crypto market, right? So I do think that earnings estimates have to come down more. Everything I'm seeing right now, they haven't come down very much at this point. So if I'm right that the economy is going to start to show more and more weakness, then those stocks are going to have to adjust down to kind of keep their status with their PE ratios. And I think that's going to be the kicker here, where if you see another 10, 20, 30% downside on the NASDAQ, maybe 20% on the S&P, then by default, it will drag down cryptocurrencies. But I'll tell you one thing that I'm looking for, and it's no one's really talking about it, but I'm curious for cryptocurrencies, and this could be a big bullish catalyst, is that do we get the Gary Genslers, the SEC, do we get some form of clarity on what kind of restrictions or what kind of rules Ethereum and the altcoins are going to have as securities? And I know everyone's like, oh my goodness, this is going to be horrible for them. But interestingly enough, clarity is what the market craves. And when you get clarity, even if it's bad initially, I believe the market will actually embrace it after an initial sell-off. So you might see it panic, right? You might see that big dip down. It's almost worth kind of throwing out some orders at ridiculously low levels, because if we get that, it sells hard, and then all of a sudden people say, wait a minute, now we know what this means. We know it. So now we can value these things. And I think, again, that could be a bottom in the crypto market. So I think initially the panic, right? It's kind of like a rising tide lifts all boats, or the opposite occurs when you see panic, people, and we saw this, by the way, in the COVID March 2020 collapse, gold collapsed, Bitcoin collapsed, the stock, people were so panicked that everything kind of fell. So I think initially you would see that, and then very, very quickly that would be a buying opportunity for something like a Bitcoin. So I would just look at it as like, if you have the view like I do that long-term Bitcoin is amazing, then I do think you use it as a buying opportunity. And the other thing I'd like to point out is that I know we're kind of dealing with, is there going to be regulation? What type of regulation? Is it going to be bad regulation? I would like to make the point that I hear a lot more of the politicians getting involved with Bitcoin and buying it as an investment. And this is what's crazy, is they're involved with the dollar and what's going on in the spending in the government. And therefore, they almost know deep down that the dollar's long-term in trouble, and they're diversifying with Bitcoin. So they're not gonna, they actually want Bitcoin to survive and thrive when they have investments in it. So I'm all for it. Like I think they'll be fine. I think the Bitcoin regulation or overall will be fine. No, I do think this is probably, and again, the next couple of weeks, part of that, by the way, is the same thing with the stock market, is that August and early September, the volume is very, very light in the stock market, in crypto. So you get a lot of these kind of crazy moves. So that's why I'm kind of questioning, is this drop we're seeing right now the beginning, or is it going to come in a couple weeks or a month from now? But I do think that ultimately within a month and a half to 2 months, we are fully in that next leg lower in crypto as a whole. And I do think, for me at least, I still have that 12,000, 13,000 price target, which happens to be a what I call a measured move, taking the initial move from 69 down to 32-ish, and then the bounce high from 48 measured out to equal that first drop would take us to about 12. Yeah, I do think that Ethereum has a little bit more downside to go, probably to around that 1,250 level, according to the charts. Basically, you just have to see a little bit of a washout. In fact, the last 3 days, you could even argue that we're starting to see a little bear flag forming, which dictates a slight negative bias there. So my guess is, if you're going to get a big bounce, you want to see that retrace. And in fact, I haven't done a Fibonacci retrace on it, but in fact, I can show my chart here and we can do it. So let's just see what we got here. So if we take this low here and we go up to the high, basically you're looking at about a little bit more than a 618 Fibonacci retrace to get back down to 1,200 and change on that. So right in that lower range, I would say. Put it to you this way, I feel more comfortable being in Bitcoin right now. So if you had a portfolio and you just said, okay, of this 100,000, how much do you put in Bitcoin? How much do you put in Ethereum? Assuming you had to be fully invested, I would probably do 65% Bitcoin, 35% Ethereum, mainly because, again, you have to look at the risks, and there's more risks. I mean, we know that Gensler basically says Bitcoin's a commodity. Right. We know that. It's Ethereum that we have to figure out how that's going to all play out. And that is an added risk. So you have to kind of factor that into your allocation in your portfolio. And just to be clear, like in terms of long term, I love Ethereum. I love Bitcoin. I'm not sold on any other cryptos yet. because I think there's too much jockeying for those next few slots. And I think you have to be careful about that. I mean, we could see Solana emerge as a leader. We could see Avalanche. We could see any of these, but there's no guarantees. And if you look a year ago at what was in the top 10 or the top 15, right, a lot of those are no longer there, and that has to be factored in as well. But you know what's always been number one and number two? Ethereum and Bitcoin, right? So I think you just want to be careful about that as investors. So keep in mind, folks, that Ethereum has already run up significantly, probably a large portion to the merge, right? Obviously, the bounce in crypto was a part of that, but I never like to be in the crowd. So if you said you have to buy one thing right now, I would absolutely go with Bitcoin because it hasn't percentage-wise gone up as much. I don't want to be, I hate being in the last portion of people that get into an asset. I always want to be first. I like being first. Yeah, so I actually think you probably will see some sort of bounce on ETH just before. So you had that initial rally where probably smart money was buying off those dead lows, knowing that the merge was going to happen. Now you're just seeing a little bit of asset selling because of de-risking. But I do think you probably, whether or not you pull back. Now, this is where 1250, 1275, if we got down there before the merge, I think you play it for a bounce right into the merge in that scenario. But I do think you could get some exciting buyers jumping into Ethereum just before that merge. I would just be very careful after that because you don't want to be stuck if it's kind of a sell the news event. If nothing big happens from that point on, don't get stuck in it if it starts to dump out. Okay, so you're looking at a big bounce. Yeah, so where the next big bounce will be, I'll show you guys here. So number one, you'll have some stops along the way, right? We all know that. Nothing goes straight up or straight down. Obviously, the double bottom at 360 is going to be support. I do think that that's a bounce level, but I think by late year or early 2023, this is your level right here. And this will be an epically big level of support. It's right around 340. It is the pre-COVID highs. All right, so the pre-COVID highs, major pivot before the collapse. And then look at how we kind of chopped right around there before breaking out. So if we do come down, small bounce or a decent bounce off double bottom here, and then ultimately the big one probably comes in around 338 to 340. So this is the tricky thing. When you're playing for bounces around unknowns that you can't kind of gauge, like do the Democrats keep the Senate? Do they, or does it flip? I mean, those are things that as a technical trader, I can't quantify out. So I usually just step back. But I will say is that I do believe by the end, by November, December, the economic picture is going to be weakening significantly. And that's the more the concern I have is like, okay, well, if we see the jobs numbers slipping and we see the economy kind of staggering with inflation still at 4 or 5%, now the market begins to panic. And I think that could be the catalyst actually to see the beginning of the sell-off all the way down to those pre-COVID levels.
Definitely for sure.
And I think it's also really important to remember, and I still remember when it was 65 to 69,000 on Bitcoin, and I was saying 20,000 is where we're headed, and people told me I was nuts because on-chain analysis says this and this and this, and my response was always yes, long term. That's like fundamentals, right? The on-chain analysis, but fear and greed always rule the near term. And so if Ethereum does this great thing and it's deflationary, but if you get a panic in the market, if the markets start to collapse, people don't think, oh, well, it's deflation. It's just like, get me out. So I will say this, and it's not the sexiest thing out there, but keep an eye on some of the miners. I'm noticing that today we're seeing a reversal in some of the gold miners, even with gold down. And I know everyone wants Bitcoin and cryptos, but there's one of those beautiful channels in Newmont Mining, and look at what we just tagged at the low end of the chart. So to me, that gets very, very interesting. Look at the collapse that Newmont Mining's had. Gold actually is down today, but one of the things to keep an eye on is it's retracing right to this. So it broke out and it retraced right to that support level. So I'm going for, at least in the next week or two, I think a rally in the miners, a rally in gold.